All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be carrying on with the electrolytic cells this evening. If you remember in the lesson that I saw you for on Tuesday, we went into the fact that there are 5 different types of cells, that typically your electrolytic cells are non-spontaneous and they effectively turn electrical energy into chemical energy, or they use electrical energy to force a non-spontaneous chemical reaction to occur. What I've prepared for today is 5 past exam papers. I went through a bunch of exam papers and I tried to find one of each of the 5 kinds so that you can see how they're likely to examine them. Also a little bit about how similar they are, yet also how differently they can be asked, and how we can take what should be straightforward knowledge and effectively kind of twist it up and make it something that you may not recognize very easily. I'm hoping that all of you will manage to recognize it really easily by the time we're done. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to hope that when I share my screen, it shares the right screen. Yay, fantastic, it does. All right, so what we're going to be looking at here is question papers. I found over the last little while, every time I pull up a question paper, there's at least one person who asks which year is it from. So I decided to make this really easy. At the top of each one, I've just quickly written down which year it's from. I've also got the table 4B down the left-hand side of the page, so we can relatively easily refer to the tools that you're going to have available to you in an exam in order to be able to answer the questions. All right, because of the way that this class is structured, just give me a second, I need to roll it down just a little bit till it all fits in on one page, which it should do, there we go. Because of the way that I'd like this class to be structured, I'm going to give you a chance to answer each of the questions as we go. It's not going to be a huge amount of time because there's no chance that we're going to fit 5 questions into an hour if you have a huge amount of time for each of them. But I would like to give you a chance to make this a bit of a hands-on experience as opposed to me just telling you the answers. So there will be times where I ask for people to give quick feedback, where anybody who has the answer or knows the answer can just type in what their response is. And then what we'll do following on from that is that if there are any questions that involve a little bit more of a calculation, I'll give you a little bit more time to answer them. All right, so the first question says, and I've just taken off the top part of the question, which I think stated that this was a question 9. All of your electrolytic cells are likely to be a question 9, so you can kind of get a little bit of predictability from that. So it says the diagram below represents 2 electrochemical cells. P, Q, X, and Y are all carbon electrodes. Please, whenever we see carbon electrodes, I want you to realize that they are technically graphite, but graphite, carbon, same. When cell B is functioning, the mass of electrode X increases. So we know that this is going to have something depositing on top of it. All right. Now, if you look carefully, you'll see we've got concentrated sodium chloride and concentrated copper chloride. Over here with cell A, we know that P is positive and Q is negative. With cell B, they just tell us it's a DC source. They don't tell us which way around it's going to be. I presume that's going to be part of the question. Over here, we've got concentrated sodium chloride, which means we've got Na plus and Cl minus. And in this particular setup, we've got copper 2 plus and Cl minus, okay, from all the different parts that you can see. Then it says here, when cell B is functioning, the mass of cell, okay, I've already done that, but what type of electrochemical cell, galvanic or electrolytic, is illustrated above? So anyone who's got an input, bearing in mind that you all hopefully know which section we're doing this evening, what type of cell have we got here? You're welcome to unmute yourself and shout out, or to type in the message bar and I'll pick it up from there. All right, let's see. I've got Bella saying electrolytic, and that is 100% correct. It is electrolytic. Now we've got to discuss, how do we know that it's electrolytic? Because sometimes you're not going to be 100% certain. The first thing that makes you know that this is electrolytic is that we have got a power source. As soon as there's a power source, we're putting in our electricity. The second thing is that this is in one container. We don't have 2 separate containers with a salt bridge between them. So because of that, this is, in this case, an electrolytic cell. Okay, for question 9.2, you're asked to write down the half reaction that takes place at electrode Q. So in this particular reaction, we've got to look at all of the things that are present. Now, I know that many of you may be more confused with cell A than with cell B. Hopefully you recognize cell B as being the electrolysis of copper chloride, but cell A is something that you haven't seen before. So I want to start off by looking at what we've got in cell A, because you're going to have to look at what half reaction takes place at electrode Q. Now, electrode Q is negative, which means that it is the cathode. We've got to look at what options we've got. The first thing I see here is sodium Na+, so I'm going to circle Na+. I also see chloride, which is Cl-. And then the last thing that you can't completely forget, if it's aqueous, we do have water. So water here, just like the water that reacted in the other reaction that we did, the membrane cell, it could potentially react. So what's going to react here is this is our only reducing agent. So in this particular reaction, once we're putting in electricity, the chloride will be oxidized to chlorine. And remember over here, of these two options, the one that happens is going to be the one that is the better oxidizing agent. And since oxidizing ability increases as we go down, it's going to be the water that reacts, not the sodium. You probably would have had a little bit of a heads up about that because we did this exact example, not in this case, but the why water and not sodium when we looked at the membrane cell. So the half reaction that takes place at electrode Q, which is the cathode. Cathode is where our reduction occurs, which means in this case, the reduction reaction is the 2H2O picking up 2 electrons, producing hydrogen gas and hydroxide ions. Okay, a little bit tricky initially, so that was a bit of a nasty one for me to start this off with. I actually was starting it off mainly to look at that type of cell, but the point is that it kind of shows you what you might get. Okay, so that means we know that at Q, we should be getting hydrogen gas and we'll see the bubbles. And in fact, here, if we were to look at what happens at P, P is also forming chlorine. So we'd get our chlorine bubbles there, and I'm going to do the chlorine bubbles. It's not quite the green I was looking for, but there we go. Okay, the question then says, the products formed in the two cells are compared. Name one substance that is produced in both cells. Now, in order to do this, we've actually got to look at what we've got. So here, I know that chlorine's gonna go, sorry, wrong way. Chlorine's gonna go to the positive electrode, and we're gonna produce Cl2. I know that sodium's just gonna hang around, and we're in fact gonna end up with NaOH in solution. And I know that we're gonna produce hydrogen gas. I'm not gonna work out what we've got happening here. If you recognize, this is actually the first type of cell that I did in our last lesson. So I hopefully can recognize that what's likely to happen here, if I've got the Cl- and the Cu2+, now I've just got to find the right one, is we're likely to form chlorine gas there and to deposit copper. Please note, the copper is going to deposit on this electrode. How do I know that the copper deposits on this electrode? Because they told me that the mass of that electrode increases. The only way it could increase is if we're depositing some copper on top of it. All right, so the question says here, sorry ma'am, why can't it be copper for the previous question? Is it because it's minus and they don't attract? Okay, the reason it couldn't be copper in this, are you talking about in cell A? Why it couldn't be copper? The reason it couldn't be copper in cell A is we don't have any copper. We've got sodium chloride. They didn't give us copper chloride to react. So they actually made this question very nasty by putting in something that isn't copper. All right. So the question here, the chloride would form, okay? The chloride would form because chloride will turn into chlorine. Look at the bits that are done in red here. But it's the sodium wouldn't, Na+ wouldn't be reduced to Na, because water is a better oxidizing agent than sodium. So that is why this reaction does not happen. It requires more energy because water is a better oxidizing agent, and therefore it won't happen. Okay, so in this reaction, copper is going to deposit here. The chloride is still going to go to that side, and we're still going to get chlorine gas. So when the question says name one substance that is produced in both cells, your answer is chlorine. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you've got to be very careful. They use the word name. Name means if we wrote Cl2, they could get fussy and say that isn't a name. Please always be careful where they ask you for formula or name or exactly what the wording is that they look for. All right. Carrying on from there, write down the letters of the two electrode where this product is formed. Choose from P, Q, X, and Y. You'll find that because of the way I've laid things out, it's hopefully quite easy to figure out where things go. All right, just a quick question. Shouldn't I say chlorine gas? You have an option. If we say chlorine, we assume it's chlorine gas. If we say chloride, we know that it's the ion. So you can say chlorine, you can say chlorine gas. We aren't going to be fussy about which of the two you say. You've got a teacher who specifically told you, and I know I quite often am one of those teachers, chlorine gas and hydrogen gas and oxygen gas, then that's fine. Go with it. It's probably more appropriate, but you're not going to get penalized in this case if you left off the word gas. All right, carrying on. So the letters of the two electrodes where chloride formed, it's going to be at P because it's the positive electrode, and in this case, it's going to be at Y. And it's only at Y because we know that copper must be depositing on this electrode because electrode X increases in mass, and chloride chloride being oxidized to chlorine isn't going to cause a mass change. All right. I know I've answered some of the questions as we went along, and I'm doing this one quite a lot for you, but it's because I think it's a rather tricky question. So I'm going to give you a chance to do the ones where I honestly believe that everybody will be able to. But I think where it's tricky like this, especially when we're beginning, it's probably easier for you to get shown how to do it than expected and given time to maybe not get there. Then the question says, is electrode X the cathode or the anode? Well, it's where copper 2 plus is depositing as copper. So if copper 2 plus deposits as copper, that over there is my reduction half reaction, and reduction half reaction must occur at the cathode. Remember, when you read these reactions from left to right, that has to be reduction. And since it's reduction, the answer is it's your cathode. Give a reason for the answer. I would say that Cu2 plus is reduced to Cu to cause an increase in the mass of the electrode. Therefore, it is the cathode. So because this is 2 marks, I think I need to not only tell them what the reaction is, but that I've in my head linked it to the mass of the electrode increasing. All right. Okay, there's a question. Can I also explain why I know that copper 2 plus is being plated or that it's gaining mass? Okay, I wouldn't say here, just wait, a quick question. Somebody said, can I say that this electrode is being plated? Technically, we're depositing copper on it, but this is a graphite electrode. If any of you have ever actually seen copper forming on graphite, I can wipe it off with a tissue. So it's not really going to stay there. So when we talk about things being plated, it's usually that our electrode is made out of a metal, and that when the other metal gets deposited on it, it actually forms metallic bonding and everything sticks together so that when you take it off afterwards, you can't kind of peel your silver off, whatever's there. So I wouldn't say that copper is being plated. I'd use the word deposited. And since when cell B is functioning, the mass of electrode X increases, I know from learning my types of cells, this was the first one that I covered in your lesson on Tuesday, I know that this cell will produce chlorine gas at the one end, copper at the other, because both of these are carbon electrodes. If you remember, they specifically told us that, and you can kind of learn that bit of it. All right. Last question says, write down the net or overall cell reaction that takes place in cell B. I am going to run out of space just a little bit here, so I'm actually going to be very brave. Can I ask, has everybody taken a screenshot of everything that they need here? So I'm going to scroll down in a second and delete a whole bunch of writing. Okay.
Ma'am?
Yes?
I'm still just a bit confused. Obviously, excluding the fact before we knew that X was the cathode, How did we? I was just confused, like how we knew, because it's graphite on both sides. X and Y are both graphite. So I'm just confused how you knew
They
which
told
side.
us that the mass of electrode X increases. One of these reactions, or one of these sides has Cl minus producing Cl2. Cl2. There's no mass increase there. There's no change in mass. The other side has copper 2 plus turning into copper, and that will put extra copper coating on the outside, which means that from that, I could figure out that the mass increase told me where the copper was being deposited. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Don't worry, it's okay. I sometimes assume that everybody understands the things, and if you don't, it's very good that you are comfortable to speak up and say, where does that come from? All right. Any other questions on this before I do the last part? This one, just for the record, was a bit of a nasty one to start off with, but for those of you who understood this reaction from Tuesday, you'll hopefully be beginning to draw little lines where you can go, I can see a bit of how I might have been able to connect all of those things together. When we're asked to do our net reaction for cell B, we knew that our chloride goes to chlorine, and we knew that our copper 2 plus goes to copper. So I find when I do net ionic, I always want to write down my oxidation half reaction. In this case, it's 2 Cl minus goes to Cl2 plus 2 electrons, and my RHR reduction half reaction is copper 2 plus picks up 2 electrons and deposits as copper. Since we've got the same number of electrons on both sides, you can just add them together to do your net ionic. So in this case, it was 2 Cl minus plus Cu2 plus goes to give you Cl2 plus Cu. Okay, if you remember from your first type of reaction that we did on Tuesday, this is the exact same one. If you remember, then I also said that we could actually look at this and see that we can combine them as CuCl2. And sometimes people prefer to put the copper for the chlorine. I find that sometimes it's a little bit neater to kind of go solids before gases. It's just one of those weird things that we do. You wouldn't get marked down if you didn't do it in the order, but it just feels more comfortable for me. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I know that this was a bit of a tricky one, so I'm going to quickly ask you to take a screenshot, ask any questions that you got. I'm just going to stop sharing in a second. Okay, there we go. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, can I quickly ask, who found that that fitted in with what they'd understood from Tuesday? Can you see that there's a link between what we did? So you had to, this one was a bit of a stretch to see the link, but you had to realize that we had we had copper chloride, okay, same substance. We also had the graphite electrodes. That was a little bit of your key mark. What did make this one a very nasty was the sodium chloride. It was a tricky question because of that. All right, so let us continue, and we're going to move on to the next question. Okay, so that first one, just for the record, was an application question based on the electrochemical, no, the electrolysis of copper chloride. There's the words. Okay, so let us continue. We're now moving on to another question, and in fact, the question itself tells you exactly what we're dealing with. It says the graph below represents the change in mass that occurs at electrode A and electrode B in an electrolytic cell during the purification of copper. Guess which of the reactions we're doing? We're doing the purification of copper. Okay, so just to quickly do a revision for anyone who didn't quite follow everything, what happens when we do the electrolysis of copper is connected to the negative electrode. We will have a pure piece of copper. Connected to the positive electrode, we will have our impure copper. All right, we will have a container that usually has copper chloride in it. And what essentially will happen here is that the impure copper will turn into copper 2 plus, same copper 2 plus as we have in solution, and the copper 2 plus will then deposit on the pure copper electrode, and we will effectively in this reaction just move copper from the impure to the pure. by having it effectively do the same reaction backwards and forwards. So it will be reduced to, it will be oxidized, there we go, oxidized to copper 2 plus. So this will be our oxidation half reaction at the positive anode, and then at the negative cathode, we'll have our reduction half reaction. Okay, so at the anode, we have copper going to copper 2 plus 2 electrons, and at the cathode, we'll have copper 2 plus picking up 2 electrons and going to copper. Okay, all right, I think I saw a question there, so just give me a second. Okay, now Isaiah, with this particular type of reaction, I'm not going to say you should know it's copper 2 plus. You should have learned these 5 reactions. So you shouldn't be umming and ahhing when we're talking about the purification of copper. Purification of copper only involves copper 2, okay? Copper 1 is a very unusual ion to find. So as a rule, if I'm ever talking about copper in an aqueous solution, I'm not even doubting which one it is. When it comes to these specific 5 reactions, you need to go over the video from Tuesday, hopefully with a combination of notes from what your teachers have taught you, and know that there are a fixed number of reactions that they can have. And in this case, copper is going to go to copper 2 plus. So it's one of those where you know it because you've learned it and because they don't do it with copper 1. Also, you may recognize that it probably involves copper chloride. They never actually mentioned that it was copper chloride, because when it comes to a question like this on electrolysis, they assume that you've gone over the reaction, you've learned the bits, and you know how it functions. Okay, so they are a little bit, I don't know if harsh is the word here, but it's a case of, we've taught you the case, we taught you this case study, now answer the questions on it. And they're not going to tell you all of the information each time, because you should have looked at this, learned it, and know what you're applying. All right. So it then says, does that make sense? Okay, perfect. All right. So there are only 5 of them. You don't need to learn a huge number above that. In fact, if you looked at the previous one, a lot of that was what I showed you in the first reaction on Tuesday. This one was the 3rd reaction I did with you on Tuesday. So the first question says, define electrolysis. Is anyone brave enough to define electrolysis for me? Anyone? Okay. I would say that electrolysis is using electrical energy to cause a non-spontaneous chemical reaction to occur. Some people will say that electrolysis is converting electrical energy into chemical energy, anything along those ideas. Okay, it is a definition, so please go and look. I'm not going to go and find my formula sheet and check exactly which version it is, but you can go and do that yourself. 9.2 says which graph A or B represents the change in mass of the anode. Now, I've been super nice here. I even told you once I draw the whole picture for you, which you hopefully would remember and write down on your own page, I want to know which is the anode. Is it going to be A or B? Now, let's think very carefully about this. The anode is where oxidation is occurring. It's where copper is turning into copper 2 plus, which means that all of this copper here is effectively, I'm not going to use the word dissolving, but it's going into solution. So this copper electrode should decrease in mass. Okay? So the anode decreases in mass. If you look at the picture, that decrease in mass is going to make it B. Okay, so B decreases in mass, therefore we can say that it's where the oxidation half reaction occurs, because copper is oxidized to copper 2 plus. The solid copper turns into an aqueous ion solution, and therefore the actual solid mass of copper is reduced. Okay. You are then asked to write down the equation of the half reaction that takes place at the cathode of the cell. I may already have done that. I know we're going pretty quickly here. If anybody really wants a chance to answer questions on your own, you can. But you may be finding for right now it's a little bit easier to just see. So at the cathode is where my reduction occurs. So because you know that purification of copper is just this single reaction backwards and forwards. If you're asked about the cathode, you realize it's the reduction half reaction. So therefore it's copper 2 plus picking up 2 electrons and producing solid copper. All right, now comes the tricky part, and I am going to let you do this or try this first. It says use the information in the graph, that'll be those numbers over there, and calculate the percentage purity of the impure copper. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you just a second or two while I pause sharing for you to try and do that on your own. Okay, see if you can use the information given in the table to work out the percentage purity. Be careful, there is a little catch with this one. Okay, if you get to an answer, please write it down for me, and then we'll compare and check. Okay. If you've got one, if you've got the answer, you can give me a thumbs up so long. Okay, yay, one person's got it. Well done. 2 people, 3, 4. Okay, you guys are joining in there. Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to work very much on the assumption that some of you have no clue what we're doing. So because of that, I don't want to leave you too long getting grumpy about not being able to do it. So I'm just going to quickly give you until the count of 10 to finish this up, and then I'm going to show you how I did it. If you didn't get it in time, don't worry, you can always go back and do it on your own later, and then we'll go through it. Okay, 10's up. All right, so what I did here was I looked very carefully at the graph, and I saw that electrode B, which is over here, which is my impure copper, went from 5 grams to 0 grams. So effectively, the decrease in mass of impure copper was a full 5 grams. The increase in mass of the pure copper was from 0.2 to 4.6. The most common mistake that people make is they forget the 0.2. The 0.2 is because we had a skinny little electrode here that already had a mass before the copper deposited on it. So our increase in mass here is only 4.4 grams. Okay, I'm pretty certain that a lot of you missed that. I know the first time I did a question like this, I nearly missed it as well. So our increase in mass is 4.4 grams. Percentage purity is the mass of the pure over the total mass. Some people say mass of pure and impure, or total mass, or it doesn't really matter. But the idea is that we've got 4.4 grams of pure copper and the 5 grams of impure copper, times it by 100. I got an answer of 88%. All right, can I just quickly ask who got that one right? You got it right, quickly give me a thumbs up. Well done. Okay, that looks like a good, well, a goodish number of you. Okay, it's not everybody, but you know what? This is us beginning a section and not everybody has yet done it. So if you haven't yet done this, don't beat yourself up about it. Look at it carefully and see how it works. Just a couple of other things that they could have asked you on this section that they didn't. You remember this section was where we had the slurry of impurities at the bottom that contained platinum and silver. Sometimes they ask questions linked to those ideas. In this case, they didn't, so you don't have to stress too much. Oh my goodness. All right, I just had a question. Where would you get the marks? I have a sneaky suspicion. It's very generous. Okay, a form of a definition maybe would get you a mark. Substitution would get you a mark. I think doing this subtraction might get you a mark. It's the fact that you actually subtracted one thing from another and then your final answer. So some form of a formula. There isn't really a formula for percentage purity, so they may instead split it between the top and the bottom. All right, you can go and look on the memo for the March 2018. I'm still guessing here. I know your final answer will have a mark. I know that the substitution will have at least 1 mark. There is a possibility that that may have a substitution mark, but I think to avoid penalizing people too much for not using the 0.2, they may have given that as a separate mark to the substituting in mark. All right, so I hope that you'd, at least if you got asked this again, you might pick those kind of things up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to keep going because we've got half an hour to do 3 more questions, 1 on each, and I'm hoping we don't run out of time. Okay, so this question, surprise, surprise, is also, oh my goodness, where did it go? Sorry, got to find the right question. Okay, we've just done that one. I want to squeeze the bottom in. All right, it's not going to work for me. We'll come back to the top just now. Okay, so the question over here says the diagram below shows an electrolytic cell used to electroplate an iron rod with copper. So this particular question is your electroplating question. So in this question, we are told that it shows that we're electroplating an iron rod with copper. So we effectively want the copper to deposit onto the iron rod. I find that I do a whole bunch of my thinking about a question before I even look at their questions, and I'd like you to get into the habit of doing the same thing. They told us solution X is made up of an unknown nitrate. But if you want to be depositing electroplating, now we can say electroplating because this is metal. If we want to be electroplating copper onto here, then we must have copper 2 plus ions, which means that a logical choice for our unknown nitrate is it should be copper nitrate. I know I'm already getting ahead and answering half of the questions, but you can do this when you begin. All right. Then comes the question, what must A be made of? Well, we need to replenish the copper 2 plus that we're depositing on the iron rod, so A should also be copper. If you think about it the way I've just thought about it, you probably answered half of the questions. So I find as soon as I get a question like this, I use the picture to figure out what's happening, what's getting oxidized, what's getting reduced, etc. So over here, I can actually look at this and say, well, I need at this electrode to have copper 2 plus copper turn into copper 2 plus, wrong way around. So I need copper to turn into copper 2 plus 2 electrons, okay? Since it's losing electrons, this is my oxidation half reaction. In fact, I can go and find it. There's the reaction, and I want it to go that way around. So that's my oxidation half reaction, therefore it occurs at the anode, okay? I also know that in electrolytic cells, my anode is positive. Remember, in voltaic cells, the anode is negative. It changes sign. I can also then go and say that this is my negative and this is my cathode. And at my cathode, I want the copper 2 plus to pick up 2 electrons and turn into copper. I figured all of this out before I've even looked at a question. But if you do, you'll find that you often manage to get through the questions a little bit faster, and you're also not quite as stumped with where do I go to next, because you've kind of seen it. So question 9.1. Solutions such as solution X are always used in electrochemical cells. Write down the general term used to describe these solutions. So what do we call solutions that are like solution X? Anybody? You're welcome to type it out. What do we call solutions like that? Brilliant. They're electrolytes. Okay, so this is an electrolyte, which is usually an aqueous solution that can conduct electricity, but you can get away with just saying any solution that can conduct electricity. What is the function of these solutions in electrochemical cells? I would say that they allow ions to move. That's very important for me. So they allow ions to move, because quite often the ions are the things that are going to be moving through solution. So they allow ions to move, and I'd say here it's also important that you realize that they conduct electricity. I tend to be one of those people in exams where I would put more answers down rather than risk losing a mark. So I wouldn't feel comfortable just saying that they conduct electricity. I'd say that they conduct electricity by allowing ions to move, because the ions that move that effectively allow the chemical reaction to occur. You are then asked to write down the formula of solution X. I've already done this. Please, if you wrote down copper nitrate, it's wrong. Formula means you must have Cu brackets NO32. This also means that they're going to filter out the silly students who write nonsense like CuNO3 because they don't know that it's copper 2 and they haven't yet worked out. Okay, some of you may also look at this and say, ma'am, isn't this exactly the same reaction as the one we just had? It is, but since they've technically told us it's electroplating, it's no longer purification of copper, it's an electroplating reaction. Okay. So which electrode, A or the iron rod, is the negative electrode? I've already answered that. It's over here, so it would be the iron rod. Give a reason for the answer. I would say here that it's got to be the negative electrode. So I would say that Cu2 plus is, now I've got to get this the right way around. Cu2 plus is oxidized. No, wrong way around. Have I got this the right way? Cu2 plus is reduced, sorry, blame it on a long evening. Cu2 plus is reduced to copper to plate the iron rod. Reduction occurs at the negative cathode. Okay, probably a little bit more wordy than it needs to be, but I've got the idea that I know that copper 2 plus is being reduced, the reduction takes place at the cathode, and that the cathode is negative, all of which may form part of your 2 marks. So 1 mark was for saying that your iron rod is the negative electrode. You probably could have got away with saying copper is reduced at the cathode, and you didn't need to say that it was a negative electrode because you've answered that by saying the iron rod. Write down the half reaction that takes place at electrode A. Well, we've already said that it's where copper's got to turn into copper 2 plus, and we wrote down the reaction over there. So it's copper going to copper 2 plus 2 electrons. Okay. You are told here that electrode A is now replaced by a silver rod without making any other changes to the cell. So that means that instead of us having copper going into solution, we now have solid silver. Solid silver isn't going to produce copper ions, it's going to produce silver ions. Okay? So the question is then to name the 2 metallic ions present in solution. Well, we're going to have both the copper 2 plus and the Ag plus. The copper 2 plus remains because some of it was in the copper nitrate, some of it was created by the copper that was previously oxidized. So it could be there for a number of reasons. Okay, then I'm just carefully going to have to scroll down here. I'm going to just scroll down to read, and then I'm going to come back up so that we can see all of our questions. The question says, Refer to the relative strengths of the oxidizing agents to explain which one of the two ions will preferably be involved in the plating process. So we have a situation where we have both copper 2 plus and silver plus that are present in solution. With both of these eventually circulating around the iron rod, we need to decide which of the two is a better oxidizing agent, because they're going to be oxidizing agents since they're reduced. And if you look here, you can see that silver is lower down. So the answer here is that Ag plus will be selectively reduced to silver because it is a better oxidizing agent. And the way that I knew it was a better oxidizing agent, it could only be an oxidizing agent. Anything that's found here on the left-hand side can only act as an oxidizing agent because it will be reduced. According to this table, they're arranged in their order of their ability to oxidize or reduce. The lower down our oxidizing agent is, the better it is. So silver is better than copper. So silver will deposit, and we'll actually have a little bit of a mess up here because then you'll have your silver, which I can only draw as blue, but your silver on top of your copper, and we'll have this iron rod plated in both copper and silver, and it's not ideal. All right, there was a question. Perfect. Well done. Somebody was writing down the answers as well. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, does this one make sense? Can you quickly take a screenshot if there's anything that you need from here? All right. I'm going to quickly clear all my drawings. I'm going to scroll down. You'll see that most of these are relatively quick questions in terms of the fact that they're between 8 and 11 marks. Just quickly want to take a second and just check, is everybody still with me? Does everybody understand what we're doing? Okay, brilliant. Perfect. Okay, hopefully you'll have found that this kind of links the sections together so that you're more comfortable with why we're doing what we're doing. All right, the question then says, this is another question 9, the simplified diagram below shows an electrolytic cell used in the industrial extraction of aluminium. Guess which type of reaction we're doing? We're doing the fourth one that I did with you in the lesson on Tuesday, and that is the extraction of aluminium. From aluminium oxide at temperatures as high as 1,000 degrees, and electrode X is a carbon rod. Okay, so over here we have electrode X. Oh, sorry, this one, just give me a second. It was, I just scrolled through it too quickly. It was here. This is March 2017. Okay, so the question says we've got electrode X. This looks a little bit different to the one I did. When I did this, we had multiple electrodes. Here we've only got one. It is connected to the positive end. And then the negative end, you'll notice, connects to the actual casing. The casing in this case, I don't think they've told you or asked you what it's made out of, but it would usually be, there we go, iron lined with carbon. The carbon, just for the record, is, as usual, graphite. So we've got an iron container usually here as our electrode. The container itself is the electrode. The cell reaction that takes place is as follows. 2 aluminium oxide turns into aluminium liquid and oxygen gas. You are asked to write down the name of the ore used as the source of aluminium oxide. Can anyone tell me what we use, or what the name of the ore is? I did mention it to you. I did mention to you that we get it from Australia and that we refine it in Richards Bay, and it is bauxite. Perfect. So we're going to use bauxite. You are then asked which half reaction takes place at electrode X. Is it the oxidation or reduction? Now, because I know some of you are not very familiar with this, I'm just going to quickly refresh your memories as to what you should be reading into here. So I should realize that in this solution, I've got aluminium 3 plus and I have got oxide, O2 minus. The aluminium 3 plus is attracted to the outside wall of the container. And when it arrives there, aluminium 3 plus picks up 3 electrons and forms aluminium. Because the temperature is 1,000 degrees Celsius, it melts and it will form this layer at the bottom. So this layer at the bottom, the whole layer is in fact my molten aluminium. Okay, so that reaction, if we go and find it over here, there it is going to be my reduction half reaction, which occurs at the cathode, and the cathode is negative. Then we also need to know that the oxygen is not on this reaction list, and you need to memorize it. So over here, what happens at this electrode here, which I now know is my anode, by default to the outside one being my cathode, and it's positive. I know that at the anode, we're going to have O2 minus, and it is going to form oxygen, O2. We need 2 O2 minuses to form oxygen, and they will give off 4 electrons. Please, you need to learn this reaction. It is not given to you on your formula sheet. It's not one of those there, so you need to memorize it. So, which of those takes place at electrode X? It's that one. So I'd write here, oh, they didn't even need the reaction. We just had to say that it was oxidation. Now, you didn't need to do all of that to answer it. You could have realized that we were doing that electrode X was positive. Since it's positive, it's the anode, therefore oxidation takes place. All of those are fine. You can tell me, what is the function of the cryolite? Anybody? If you remember in this case, the big problem that we had with aluminium oxide is that it doesn't dissolve in water. If it did, it was really good. Okay, fantastic. Michaela said to reduce the temperature required. You're going to have to be a little bit more specific than that, but you're 100% correct. So it is effectively to lower the melting point. Not just the temperature required, it lowers the melting point of the electrolyte. Please be very careful. A lot of you would say something about to lower the temperature, but you haven't actually answered the question. It's to lower the temperature required to get everything moving as an electrolyte, or to melt the electrolyte, something like that. Write down the reduction half reaction. Okay, I've already assisted with that. So that's aluminium 3 plus, picking up 3 electrons and going to aluminium. Please note in this case, aluminium liquid, but we don't really have to stress too much. Please also make sure that electrons should have a minus on it. If it doesn't, you lose your marks. All right, then you are asked to write down a balance equation that shows why the carbon electrode X must be replaced regularly. Hopefully you all remember that as soon as we form the oxygen bubbles here, the carbon reacts with the oxygen, and we'll have a reaction here that says carbon plus oxygen goes to produce carbon dioxide. That is an incredibly generous 3 marks. It makes me tempted to very quickly put in my state symbols just in case that's what it needs. But they asked you there for a balanced equation. It is already balanced. I've got 1 mark usually when we do this. It's 1 mark for starting materials, 1 mark for products, 1 mark for balancing. And that gives us our total of 3 marks. All right, so this was a relatively nice one. You'll notice sometimes if you compare how easy this one was to the very first one we did today, you can see that there's quite a nice range of, you can get one where you've actually got to really think, and then you can get one where you get to the end of it and you're like, I don't know why I studied so hard. Okay, I hope for your sake you get one where you've really got to think, but I think some of you would prefer one where you'd rather wonder why you studied so hard. All right, can I clear this? We can do the last question for today. The last question that I've got planned for today is for us to do the last type of reaction. Ooh, I've got 2 types of reactions. Okay, I'm going to skip this one over here because we've already done one on electroplating. Okay, I'm going to jump to the last one just now. That one we can maybe come back to. Apologies. Just in case anyone's really anxious and they want to know which one they were missing. It was June 2017 and it was also on electroplating. But I did an example where we electroplated that iron rod with copper, which kind of covers some of your electroplating. All right, but I do think that one was a better choice. Damn. Okay, masterclass, it'll be there. All right, so the next question here says, in the electrochemical cell shown below, the carbon electrodes are used during the electrolysis of a concentrated solution of sodium chloride shown below. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this looks like nothing that you've seen before, except that this is your membrane cell. How do I know that it's my membrane cell? Remember, your membrane cell is part of your chloroalkali industry. Is I put in sodium chloride and I get out two gases. One of them will be hydrogen, one of them will be chlorine. I also know that my last product that I should form is sodium hydroxide. How do I know all of these things? Because I've learned my reactions. You need to go and learn yours as well so that you don't have that problem. Normally in this reaction, we'd have a cationic membrane to make sure that things didn't mix. In this reaction, because the two gases are collected in the chambers above, and I don't think we're really collecting off our sodium hydroxide, we don't worry quite as much, but you could imagine that it is the one that had the semi-permeable cationic membrane. So this is the positive electrode. This is the negative electrode. I know that because that is the positive end of my battery, my cell, and the negative end. Okay, technically this is a cell, it's singular. The balanced equation for the overall or net ionic reaction is given over there. First question, is this an endothermic or exothermic reaction? Who can tell me? Who has a good guess at this? You can actually think about it, whether it's spontaneous or not. Spontaneous is usually exothermic. So it is not exothermic. This needs energy, so it is endothermic. Spontaneous gives off energy, so it's exothermic. Non-spontaneous takes in energy or requires energy, therefore it's endothermic. So this particular reaction, and in fact all electrolytic reactions, are endothermic. You put in electrical energy, they absorb the electrical energy, and therefore they do what you want them to. Okay. Then you're asked, is electrode P the anode or the cathode? Well, it's the positive one, and we remember that our positive, it's the wrong way around. So the positive is the anode and the negative is the cathode. So electrode P, because it's connected to the positive end of the battery, positive terminal, is going to be the anode. The reason for this is that the anode is the positive electrode, or you could mention that it is connected to the positive terminal of the battery. Since we know that this is positive, if I consider in here that I know that Na plus and Cl minus are in here, the Cl minus is going to go to this electrode, which means that this is going to be chlorine gas. Please remember the sodium doesn't react. Once again, there's sodium, there's water. The sodium won't react, the water will react. When the water reacts, this will end up being our hydrogen gas. So we now don't need to speculate, we know where they're produced. So the name or formula of gas X, it's Cl2. The name or formula of gas Y is H2. The reduction half reaction, oh my goodness, need to think twice. Reduction occurs at the cathode. So it's going to be this reaction here. So it would be 2H2O plus 2 electrons go to produce hydrogen and 2OH minus. And then you're asked, is the solution in the cell acidic or basic, alkaline after completion? Remember, a base is a proton donor, alkaline is a soluble base. So is it acidic or alkaline after the completion of the reaction? Give a reason. Does anyone have a reason for this? And an answer. Anybody? Any volunteers? Okay, you're going to find that as you practice these more, you'll hopefully get to the point where you're more familiar with them. I told you that the products which you can learn are chlorine, hydrogen, and sodium hydroxide. The sodium hydroxide makes it alkaline. And the reason is that sodium hydroxide is produced. Now, just as a point of interesting things that they could do with this reaction, what about if I did this reaction with an indicator in here? And I happen to notice that around one of the two electrodes, the indicator changed color. So maybe I put in bromothymol blue and the solution initially was neutral and it was green. And then around this side, I noticed it started getting bluer. I could use that information to predict that that's where the sodium hydroxide or the hydroxide ions, those ones, are being produced, and that's why it's changing color. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I said we were done, but I think since there was that extra one question and we've still got 5 minutes, we may as well just quickly jump up and have a look at it. I know I've gone through some of the things, hopefully not too quickly, but a little bit quickly today. This was the June 2017 paper. Hopefully you found that it still makes enough sense, and that what you've maybe realized is that you need to spend a large amount of time learning these. So go back, treat them as being memorization sections, but memorizing with an understanding of how to apply them. So the question here says the simplified diagram below shows a cell used to electroplate an iron metal with a thin layer of gold. Think about it. If we want to replace it with gold, this must be gold. Gold must go to produce. Now, if you look here, you can see that gold is I keep doing G's. They're not G's, that's silver. It's AU3+, and then we want our AU3+ to deposit there. So you'll see that gold is not on this table anywhere, which is why you need to make sure you go over something like this. So on this side, I've got AU going to AU3+ plus 3 electrons. If you look at this, we're losing electrons. So this is my oxidation half reaction. Oxidation occurs at the anode, and the anode in this case is positive. So we can actually say that the battery must have a positive terminal there and a negative terminal there. This is the positive electrode. This will be the negative electrode. You could also have figured that the gold ions would move towards the negative electrode. That makes this the cathode. And at the cathode, what happens is that we have our reduction half reaction, where the gold ions pick up 3 electrons and form solid gold. And therefore, they will, I'm going to call that gold, they will plate this metal in gold. Let's go and have a look at the questions. Is this an electrolytic or galvanic cell? It's electrolytic purely because it's got a battery. Also because we've already, if we've done this in an exam, done the galvanic question before this, so we know that. Which electrode P or the metal is the anode? If you look over here, it'll be P. Okay, technically the metal, sorry, not the metal. So P is the anode. Write down the half reaction that takes place at P. I've written it over there. I'll rewrite it. Gold goes to gold 3+ plus 3 electrons. The oxidation number of gold in the electrolyte, it is AU3+. Please, that doesn't answer the question. The question just wanted you to write 3+ or +3. The energy change that takes place, this is electrolytic. So we are turning electrical energy into chemical energy. The visible change that occurs in electrode P after the cell functions for a while, well, all of the gold is turning into gold 3+. So I would say that it decreases in size. Let's actually write that out in full, because it's going to, I'm not going to say dissolving because that isn't really the right word, but gold turns into gold 3+, which dissolves in solution. There we go. So I would say that P decreases in mass. Technically, it gets smaller, it looks smaller, something like that. Besides improving the appearance state, one other reason why the metal is electroplated, you could say there that it becomes more valuable. Okay, you might, I wouldn't really go with gold being something that lasts longer. I don't think gold's necessarily particularly durable. I'd say that here you're looking for it's more valuable, it's more sought after, something like that. Okay. Also, actually, there's your reason. It was an iron metal. So you could also say that the iron metal will not rust. It's probably a better answer that they were looking for. If this had been silver, I wouldn't have gone with anything about rusting. Only iron can rust. Silver doesn't really corrode that much. So it does, gold technically corrodes less than silver. Gold's a noble metal, so it doesn't break down at all. But yeah, that, I think the iron specifically, they'd link to the rust. And then state one of two possible changes that should be made to the above cell to electroplate the silver metal with silver, electroplate the metal with silver instead of gold. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to make sure that you've got silver nitrate in here. Please, you cannot do silver chloride, it won't work. And then you've got to make sure that you use the silver as an electrode. So P must be solid silver. So you put in a solid silver electrode, and the electrolyte must change to silver nitrate. Please, silver chloride, bromide, any of the other silver salts won't be soluble and therefore it won't work. Quickly take a screenshot of that if you haven't already. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that there's quite a lot of learning in this particular section. I hope that you found that what we did tonight with the particular examples helped to see how we apply it. I know I raced through it a little bit because there were quite a few that I wanted to get through, but hopefully it made good sense.